I mean, I was actually speaking to one artist yesterday about uh, doing a commission for Aquilus 3, which is currently on Kickstarter as one of the stretch goals. And the artist came back to me and kind of gave me these ideas, and I said, "Run with those ideas, and I'm going to kind of change the writing a little bit to kind of match your work." And that's actually how I enjoy sort of art directing.
Hi, welcome to the Dieku podcast. I am Gary Snow, and joining me is Vasili Kaliman, who is the designer of Singing Flame brand and all the interesting games that come along with this, which is Aquilus and Xanadu and Dungeon and Nightland, which we're all going to talk about shortly. But first of all, Vasili, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
And, we talked a little bit before we started the show that since 2020, when I first actually discovered you with Xanadu, that was my first introduction to you. And I saw that on Questing Beast. And you've really kind of been very prolific in the short time that you've produced like a lot of these games that I just showed. But I'm interested to know your journey on how you got to this point.
I can talk a bit about my gaming history. I started playing when I was in high school, when I was about 13, and I think I grew up in Australia, so I don't think D&D was like widely available. I remember it being very expensive, so it wasn't something that sort of every kid could own. But I started playing in high school, and there was probably 2 other people in the entire school that played. And I think that lasted for about 4 years or 5 years, and then I took a huge sort of break as I became an adult, and then I got back into it probably in about 2000 and it would have been about 2015, 2016, and I came back into it through Dungeon Crawl Classics, and I moved to New York from Australia in 2016, and I found a group here, a DCC group. And that kind of got me back, really into gaming. I mean, I sort of learned about the OSR. I was a bit late for things like Google Plus, because everyone talks about the Google Plus days, and I was quite late for that. But basically, just got me back. I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. This is pretty amazing. Like, people playing with these really simple rules, and that was my kind of that was my trajectory, and when I played, I was always kind of writing as well. I was just like writing stuff, like writing down ideas or writing down, scenes or just weird kind of stuff. And when the COVID lockdowns happened in, I think it was March of 2020, the kind of day job I was doing kind of just froze still, and I started writing Aquilus really just to have somewhere to put a whole bunch of these ideas that I'd come up with over the last few years before. So that's how the whole thing kind of started.
And you mentioned DCC, and just can you kind of elaborate? Because I mean, I really love DCC for a variety of reasons, but I just kind of want to ask you what's your take on why it kind of resonated with you?
Well, I think what really resonated with me about DCC was the art in the core rulebook. So when I actually bought it, I think what attracted me to buy it in the first place was the art. I just looked at all that black and white kind of sword and sorcery kind of stuff, and I thought, wow, this is like some really good art in here. And the things that were kind of available at the time when I was going into gaming stores, especially coming to New York, because there are a few gaming stores, I used to see all that very sort of polished kind of 5e art. And I just never really connected with that kind of work, I just never really connected with that kind of, digital painting. I mean, I respect it, but it just never kind of spoke to me. And when I saw the DCC book kind of all in black and white, I sort of bought it, and I thought, I'm going to buy this because of the art, because the art's sort of really great in it. And there was just, I don't know, I think that that's what really kind of, that's what I really connected with. I mean, I had no idea that it came from 3.5. I mean, I never played 3.5. I stopped at 1E, D&D, AD&D 1E. But there was just something to it. There was just a grit to it. You know, there was just a grit, and you know, there was something kind of dirty about it. And I just really loved, you know, the tone of the rule book. And then I found, what did I do? I downloaded an app called Meetup, and I found that there was actually a DCC group in Brooklyn, which I joined for kind of many years, and we played, you know, for several years. We'd play every Sunday, and it was just a fantastic kind of segue back into gaming. And I haven't played for a while. I haven't played DCC for a couple of years now, but it's kind of a re-entry into the hobby. I mean, it just kind of was something that was, and I think, you know, from what I've seen, I go to a lot of cons, and I think that is the case with people my age, who've kind of stopped gaming, who were gaming when they were young, and kind of stopped because of, you know, life responsibilities and jobs and families and things like that. That when they get back into their game, when they get back into gaming, DCC seems to have been like a common re-entry point back into it. And even though the rules aren't sort of like D&D, but it just seems to be that there's just a tone that it's captured, which I think speaks of what we loved about D&D as teenagers, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
And I really think that is, you know, I think that's very common, because, you know, a lot of the people that play DCC who I see at cons are, you know, kind of like my age as well. So I think, you know, really young people play it, but it seems to be people that kind of played in the 80s, you know, and then they get back into it. It's just captured something, you know, it's just captured something.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's just got that right vibe, and it just has that right
feel. It's got the vibe, yeah. And it's got the vibe and the feel, and I think they base it. You know, they have the whole kind of appendix N thing, sort of. You know, that's kind of, you know, that's the kind of halo that they wrap it up in. But I think they've done a great job. And even though I don't play it much anymore, I still buy all their products, and I still actually really enjoy reading them. I mean, the adventures I feel are much harder to run than, say, what OSE's done with, you know, with kind of, you know, with the writing style of their adventures. But I still like really enjoy reading DCC adventures, you know, for let's say for the prose, let's say for the writing. I actually still enjoy cracking them open and reading them like RPG metafiction, if you like. So I'm still a big supporter of the system in that sense.
Yeah, I'm a great admirer of the community that they've built in DCC.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's
like amazing.
At Gen Con, I know they take up half a football field with just the games themselves. And if you go to their booth, they have all the old Appendix N novels and novellas in like one of those spin racks.
Oh, yeah.
It has that kind of,
I've seen that.
Nice feel to like the community. And
well, I mean, all credit to them. I mean, I think in terms of community building, I think out of all of the sort of, say, OSR publishers, I mean, they've probably done the best job, because, I mean, it's the same, like when you go to any con, like I go to GaryCon, for example, which, you know, I'm going to next month. And I mean, the amount of DCC games that are run there is just extraordinary. I mean, you know, I looked at the schedule a couple of days ago, and it's like DCC. But I'll tell you what the secret is. I think I've figured out what the secret is of why DCC is so successful at cons, because a lot of their adventures are written to be run in 4 hours.
Yeah.
That's kind of the secret, I think. Like, I mean, nearly all of their adventures are kind of designed to be one shots, and they just have great pacing, you know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they're designed to do. Like, I mean, most of the adventures that I played in my group, in my Brooklyn group for years, were kind of one shots. And I think we exhausted the entire official line pretty quickly. And then we moved on to all the third party stuff. But we found that that's what worked for us. You know, what worked for us is running an adventure in 4 hours. And I think why it works at cons so well is that you can run the entire adventure from start to the climax in 4 hours, which is typically what a con game runs at. And I think that is just part of the secret sauce as to why they've become so successful on the con circuit and why they've built up such a community.
Yeah, I agree with all those things, and also just fun. I think, you know,
They're great fun.
if you're going to commit to 4 hours at a con, you want to have fun, and the system itself and the way it's structured and the adventures are just fun. And you know, there's a time and place for fun, and there's a time and place for seriousness, and there's a wide array of gaming styles. But DCC really nails that. You know, you're here for 4 hours, and it's going to be fun.
You're there for 4 hours, and you want everything that can happen in an RPG adventure to happen. So, you know, you want a trap, you know, you want sort of, you know, you want a super deadly boss monster that you can't kill. You want a crazy magic item. You want, you know, just stuff that you know, you want the tropes. Yeah. And I think DCC provides all of those kinds of sword and sorcery tropes, you know, which are really, I think, you know, I mean, they're in the popular cultural consciousness, those things, you know. I mean, that's why we resonate with them, because, you know, they're played out in all kinds of things, all kinds of stories and films. And I think DCC knows how to capture a little bit of that in every adventure. So in every adventure, you're going to get, you know, a good half a dozen sort of moments that are kind of like, oh, you know, playing RPGs is fun. And I think that that's what they give you. And they're very good at it. They're very, very good at it.
Well, enough pumping the tires of DCC. Let's get on to pumping your tires, because you're doing some really you're doing some really good work. And like I mentioned, I've got all your zines here, and I am jealous of you, because during lockdown for me, my job for what I do, which is corporate communications and that kind of stuff, I actually got busier. So I was like jealous of everybody else being able to kind of work. I'm sure at the time it didn't feel like a good thing for people to be laid off or slowed down, but for me, I was very jealous. But you turned that time into some really good stuff. And
thanks.
The Singing Flame, the brand itself, like, did you always have that in the back of your mind? Because I mean, to me, that the logo is awesome. Like, it just encapsulates so much of the weird science fantasy. And like, how did you go, okay, this is what I'm going to do?
I'd always thought of the name. I'd always the name Singing Flame comes from a Clark Ashton Smith story called City of the Singing Flame. So that's where I sort of borrowed that from. And I think I like to write down names of things. I mean, I have literally like hundreds, if not thousands, of like names of things written down, because I think names embody so much. You know, and sometimes, you know, a title of something can be the entire springboard for what it becomes. Like Nightland, the name came first. And because of that, you know, that's where the setting came out of. And I think Singing Flame was kind of the same. It just seemed like, you know, it just seemed like such a counterintuitive, you know, you put the words together and it's just so kind of counterintuitive, like flames that kind of sing. And so that's where that came from. And I'm not sure what I was going to do with that name when I first came up with it. I thought, oh, maybe that's a good name for an adventure, like the Singing Flames or something like that. And I think, well, that's kind of a good image. Maybe that can become some sort of adventure. But it just ended up becoming the name of the publishing imprint. And I had a very good artist called Benjamin Mara design that logo, who's who's a fantastic illustrator, and you know, he's done things for RPGs, and he's done his own comic books. And I've collected his work. I collected originals of his work, original comic pages, kind of probably back in since about 2012. So we've maintained, you know, a kind of connection, you know, on social media mainly, but we've maintained a connection for years. And I commissioned him to do the logo, and I think he kind of captured, you know, really captured something. You know, when he did the logo, he kind of said, like, you know, what were you looking for? And I said, well, I think I want something like the TSR Wizard logo from the late 70s. You know, that TSR has this logo, and there's like some kind of wizard in there. And I think it would appear in Dragon magazines, or, you know, it would appear in ads that they did in other publications. And I think, well, that's kind of the vibe. And then he sort of elaborated on it and did those amazing flames with with the typography and stuff. And I was really, really, really happy with it. I mean, I came up with a logo, and it was just pretty crap compared to what he came up with. It was really awful. But he really, just kind of captured something. And I thought, wow, I'm gonna be really, really proud to use this on the books. This is so good.
And I have to say, I kind of jokingly mentioned I was creeping you a little bit more on social media in preparation for the interview, and you have like an affection for art in general, and you can
Yes,
see behind
yes,
you
yes.
some of the really nice pieces that are on the wall there. As far as the art direction and your history, and it seems like you've been connected into that for quite some time. Just talk to us about like how you approach the art piece, the overall art design and art direction for all your games, because it's like it's modern and it's clean, but it also scratches that itch that we've talked about, that vibe as well. How did you kind of arrive at that?
Well, I mean, that probably goes back a really long time. I mean, I think the first thing, amongst the first things that I was into, aside from games, were comic books, which I've maintained a lifelong kind of love for, and I've also loved black and white illustration for like a really, really long time. Kind of since I was like a really young teenager. I mean, I used to love all that stuff, like the Bernie Wrightson and Richard Corbin and all of those artists that drew for things like Heavy Metal magazine in the 1980s. And then when I kind of when I became an adult, I mean, my career before coming to New York was that I was an art dealer for 15 years in Australia. So I had galleries and worked with contemporary artists, probably not doing the kinds of things that I put in my books. They were doing, a different kind of work, probably a bit like the work that you see behind me. They were doing, kind of, I suppose, what you'd call very contemporary kind of work. But I always had a love for, or maybe like a secret love for, the things that spoke to me when I was young. I still always had a secret love for like comics and role-playing game art. And so I think the things that that I do now in terms of what resonates with me and how I go about it is that I tend to like I mean I tend to gravitate towards artists who for example work in black and white. That's something that really appeals to me, and also artists who primarily work with ink on paper. That's just something because there's just an ambience about that to me. There's just there's just something about it that's there's just a warmth to it which you can kind of feel when you actually see the work. So and in terms of where it comes from, I mean, I think the things that have always kind of stuck with me are of course things like the black and white art that you would see in say the AD&D 1E Dungeon Master's Guide and Player's Handbook and the Moldvay Cook BX books. I mean, to me, they're like kind of the benchmark of the kind of work that I like. I mean, I like things where, I mean, I suppose the kind of art that I'm looking for is I'm looking for work that's very sincere, and it almost looks like an amateur who's pushing their abilities to the very limit. I'm looking for that kind of love and sincerity in the work. So they're the kinds of artists that I sort of am instinctively drawn to in terms of role-playing game art. And often what I tend to do as well in terms of, say, the art direction is sometimes I give the artist, which is what I really like doing, is sometimes I give the artist a very vague idea of what I'm looking for, and then I let the art then dictate the writing.
Mm-hmm.
I actually prefer to work that way.
Yeah,
I mean, you obviously have to give an artist some kind of parameter. I mean, you can't sort of say do anything because that doesn't work. But if you give them limitations, if you can't, I mean, I was actually speaking to one artist yesterday about doing a commission for Aquilus 3, which is currently on Kickstarter, as one of the stretch goals. And the artist came back to me and kind of gave me these ideas. And I said, run with those ideas, and I'm going to kind of change the writing a little bit to kind of match your work. And that's actually how I enjoy sort of art directing. I mean, I don't really, I mean, look, unless it's for a very specific kind of adventure where there's like a room and it has particular things in it, and then the artist has to probably do it kind of correct, I suppose, you know, because otherwise it could impact the adventure. I mean, when it comes for things like, say, other things that I'm doing, especially for things like Nightland, which Andrew Walter did work for. I mean, he strongly influenced the writing. I actually enjoy working, I suppose, collaboratively with artists. And I really love that part of it. I mean, that to me is the exciting part. I mean, the exciting part for me is when I look at my email and there's a JPEG attached to one of the messages that an artist has done. And when I actually crack that JPEG open, that's like, you know, that for me is like a very exciting moment, because I think this will, you know, I hope that this has an impact on the writing. And that's kind of what I'm looking for with artists.
Yeah, and they're not there to just push buttons, right? Like I see that a lot where people are saying, here's the criteria, here's the briefing note, and it's so strict that they're unable to flex their creativity. And it's just at that point, you're telling them to push their buttons to make it right. But your approach is much more collaborative, and I think probably artists appreciate that a lot more.
I think it also suits it also suits the kinds of things that I'm writing about, because so I feel that a lot of what I'm writing about, say with in terms of gaming, I mean, sometimes I write and I think, well, I don't even know if what I'm doing is actually playable, you know, but it actually sometimes makes for good, you know, sometimes it makes for writing being accompanied by like really beautiful kind of fantasy imagery, and sometimes, you know, that can kind of be enough. So, but I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I do actually love. I love the collaboration. I'm actually looking for that. I'm actually looking for sparks, you know, from other people, and so far it's been artists.
And that's probably similar to even just role playing in general, is that collaborative storytelling process that that's why you play. You don't know what you're going to get at the time. It's just kind of a fun experiment.
It is fun, and to me, I think one of the most fun things about playing is, I mean, I enjoy DMing a lot, and I'm running a game at the moment, and I mean, last week we had a situation where just the most unexpected thing happened, and I thought, yes, what a great idea one of the players came up with, you know, what a fantastic scene that was, you know,
Yeah.
and that's what you're looking for, I think, in this hobby. You know, you're looking for those moments where, you know, the story or the adventure takes on a life of its own, because there's just something that sort of comes in there that wouldn't have happened unless you were kind of doing it with other people.
Cool. And then we talked a little bit about it already, but Aquilus, probably we're pronouncing that poorly. I'm bad at that.
Yeah, it's Aquilus or Aquilus.
Aquilus.
I don't have a.
I'll blame it on the
way
Canadian accent.
What you should say, yeah.
So when you were doing this during the COVID lockdown, did you anticipate it was going to be received well? Because obviously your career has kind of blossomed here. Did you just do it? You mentioned you wanted to do it, but did you anticipate how well it was going to be received, all of your work?
Well, I mean, no. I mean, the answer is no. I mean, I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea of, you know, when I originally kind of did it, I had no idea of how I would even get it out there. I mean, I think I was following a lot of Facebook groups, and I think one of the pivot points, actually, I mean, there was a pivot point, and one of the pivot points were that I figured out from, you know, being on Facebook that you could actually print 50 copies of a zine somewhere and get really good quality printing. And I think I use Mixam, which is a printing company that I know a lot of bookmakers and zine makers in the RPG hobby use. And I thought, well, if you get really high quality and you only have to print 50 copies or 100 copies, then that is a good sign, you know, of being at, you know, like, you know, you don't have to sort of commit thousands of dollars and print 1,000 copies, you know, in you know, so and I think how I originally did it was how did I do it? I think I just put things up on Facebook. That's what I did. I think I did something like, look, I've made this zine, and I put a picture of the cover up on Facebook. I spent quite a bit of time on the cover, because I thought, well, you know, the cover should be as appealing as possible. So I spent a, you know, long time sort of, you know, with the typography and finding an image, and I used a public domain image of and a Redon painting. You know, he was a symbolist artist, you know, from the late 19th century. And I put it up on Facebook. And, you know, I think people bought it on Drive-Through RPG. And I had a lot of good feedback. You know, people enjoyed, you know, the art and the design and all that kind of stuff. And then I think I contacted Exalted Funeral and sent them some images of the work. And they bought a bunch of copies. And I thought, oh, this is kind of exciting. You know, this is like, you know, this is like the online store. And I thought that's quite a big deal. And that's, you know, that's kind of how the whole thing started. It was just, you know, it was very kind of innocent, really, not knowing what I was doing, knowing that I wanted to make something, but not really being familiar with how it kind of works in the RPG hobby. But, you know, having said that, I think most people who do this or make stuff like I do, it's, you know, they're probably going about it in a very similar way. I mean, they're probably just trying to, you know, put something up on social media in the hope that it gets some kind of traction or momentum, and they're sort of distributing images out there. They're, you know, maybe you know, starting up a Twitter account and with a modest online store and sort of putting their books up there. I mean, that's kind of how this hobby works, I think, because I think most people that are doing it are, you know, are like one-person shows. You know, like,
Yeah,
I mean, you know, I mean, there's no one kind of doing, you know, that, you know, I mean, you know, there's no one doing Singing Flame besides me. So.
Yeah,
and the artists, of course, but there's no like office with, you know, people in there and designers and things like that. And you're all kind of doing it on your own, basically. You know, you're doing your own promotion and your own kind of marketing, if you want to call it that. But you know, I think, but you know, yeah, but that's how it kind of started, really.
I was interviewing Gabriel Quiroga, who did the Warpland books and Hell Knight, and big fan of his, as you know, obviously, as well as yours. But he had mentioned that he kind of saw it like a punk rock band, you know, early days, like in a town, that there might be a show and there's probably 4 bands playing, and the audience is primarily the other bands and the families of those bands. And it takes a while for maybe somebody to kind of hit that critical mass where they kind of like evolve past those kind of shows to get bigger.
Yeah, well, I think that's, yeah, well, I probably agree with Gabriel that I think that initially your audience is other makers. You know, that's who your audience is, because someone turns up and you kind of think, well, what's this? Who's that? And that's who your other audience is. I'd agree with that. And look, I think one of the keys is, which I think is difficult to do, is you know, you just have to keep on making stuff.
Yeah,
and that's not easy to do.
Just put it out there.
That's not easy to do. Yeah, and you just have to put it out there. You know, you just have to put it out there, and I think just having you know, just making stuff is kind of the key to it. You just have to, you know, be productive, and it's not always easy to be productive. You know, like I mean, you know, I mean, I go through it as well, where there are just months and months where I'm just really, really productive, and then there are just months where I'm not, you know, and it's really hard to maintain that. I find it difficult to maintain that consistency in a sustained way over, you know, a consistent period of time. I mean, it's, you know, some people can do it and that's great, but I think making stuff is always, you know, is important, and just putting it out there.
And it's difficult. Everybody that is doing this tends to be doing it part-time in their spare time, and they don't have that full commitment. They have day jobs that they're working on, and it's hard to maintain that consistency when you're living that kind of life. You have different deadlines and different priorities that are coming your way. Um, when Xanadu was Xanadu next after?
Xanadu was next. Yeah.
How big of a boost was it when Ben from Questing Beast had it reviewed? Like, were you surprised? Did you know that was coming?
No, I didn't know that was coming. I'm not sure how big of a boost. I don't think he was as big then as he is now. I think back then he was, I think he definitely had an impact. But I mean, it definitely kind of boosted it. I mean, it definitely nudged it. It was just something that I think it was reviewed on the 10-foot pole blog.
Yeah.
And it got like a best kind of rating on that. And I think that was I think Ben's review kind of really gave it a lot of momentum. But I think the thing that really gave it a lot of momentum and got it out there, because I tend to undervalue my work. I had it as pay what you want, with a suggested price of $1 on Drive-Thru-RPG, and that was like that for kind of at least a year and a half. So I think that actually gave it the big boost, to be perfectly honest. I mean, because I just didn't know what sort of price to put on it. I kind of thought, well, who's going to pay like $9.99 for a PDF? It's like, or $7.99. I just didn't really have that kind of confidence.
Yeah.
So that's what I actually did. So when that review came out that I think that 10-foot pole did, which I believe is a influential kind of blog. I mean, I saw all the downloads coming. I'd open up my email box and think, oh, another download. There were hundreds of downloads, but it was because it was pay what you want. That's what I attribute part of its kind of success to, the fact that I just wasn't. I was undervaluing what I was doing, and I was kind of a bit scared to kind of charge anything for it.
Yeah. Well, I've actually had Bryce as a guest on the show before, and he talked about his criteria for what he considers good adventures. So hats off to you that you were able to navigate that, because he's not always the kindest to some adventures. So great that you made it through that. And then Nightland, was that the next?
I think Aquilus 2 was the next one.
Okay, so you circled back, and this Aquilus is going to be a series, and you're kickstarting number 3, which we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah.
But so do you, and also, not to get too far ahead of myself, but like Dungeon, which was one of our favorite. Me and Logar had a year-end live stream, and it was named as one of our best products. And these kind of like volumes where it's like, a version, like it's like a magazine essentially. It's like Dragon magazine and volume 1, 2, and 3. And I know that this one also says volume 1 on it. Is that kind of where you like to sit more, as in like the those kind of periodicals where it's like volume 1, 2, and 3, or do you actually like singular adventures like Nightland?
Look, I mean, to be honest, I think what I really, because I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking really deeply about what is it that I actually like, and that's just been a question that I've sort of pondered now really quite seriously for the last 6 months. And I think where my heart is with RPGs, it's probably more in the periodical side. And I think the reason for that is one thing that I've always had since I was, again, a teenager. I've always had a deep love of magazines. I've always collected magazines, and I mean, in Australia, I was the publishing director of a big art magazine there. So I've always had a love of magazines, from, things like Mad Magazine, for example. I've always loved, I always loved buying magazines which had staples on them, And I've always loved zines as well. That's just been that's been another thing that I've sort of loved, because they're zines are kind of finite. It's like 48 pages max, and it just gives you some really good parameters to work with, and there's just a beautiful intimate size, and you can kind of make an artifact out of it. And so I think I mean, I find adventures very difficult to write, to be honest. I mean, I find them really, really difficult to write. Like writing I mean, I've worked on a standalone adventure for the last kind of year and a half, and I kind of canned it because I just couldn't. I found it really. I just got stuck, and I just couldn't sort of. So I'm going to put it away for a while. But I actually really love. I actually really love doing periodicals. So and the reason why with Aquilus is like I can just kind of put stuff in there that doesn't really go together, and it's all kind of cordoned off in its own kind of section with a title, with an artwork, and that's kind of what you get in a magazine. Like when you buy a magazine, there's lots of things in there, like the old Dragon magazines, which I've always loved, or the White Dwarf magazines. There's a letters page, there's an intro, there's a character class, there's a monster, there's an article, there's something, and it's just all kind of shoved in there under the banner of the cover. And I think I just really enjoy. I really enjoy periodicals. So I think Aquilus is definitely something I'd like to continue. I mean, I've nearly finished the 4th issue of that as well. But the art's going to take quite a while to sort of commission. So that's probably 6 to 12 months off. But that's probably a direction that I definitely want to pursue. And I like the adventure stuff, but I do honestly find that quite difficult. I find it difficult to write a coherent sort of adventure. I mean, that's just there are people out there that are much better than me at it that I really admire, and I find it difficult to get to their kind of to their levels.
And maybe that's a good time to bring in discussing Nightland. I mean, it was such evocative art. I did a review of it as part of my Halloween month. I'll link to that up above for those that want to see it. But when you approach it, I mean, and you talked about the design of the maps and the artwork. I mean, I just love this map. I just like it. Just kind of scratches that kind of itch for me.
Again, too, the artist who did that amazing map was the same artist that designed my logo.
Yeah.
He designed the Singing Flame logo. So.
And when you talk about your appendix, and one of the things I really appreciated about all your zines that you put out is that you really go into detail about your kind of personal influences when you're making the product. And that speaks to your background as far as like, growing up and your likes and that kind of thing. But the weird fantasy setting and the OSR, when did you kind of transition? Like, I mean, you were playing DCC, and then when did OSR hit for you? And especially Old School Essentials, because we're going to talk about Dolmenwood also, that you're doing some of the art direction layout for. And when did OSE kind of take on your kind of, I guess, preferred system of choice?
I think OSE, I think it would have been in probably about, I think it probably became my preferred system of choice, I think a couple of years ago. And again, too, that was on such a trajectory, that system, that it was kind of unavoidable. And what I did is when I actually went back to, when I came back into the hobby with DCC, I mean, one of the things that it did, of course, was put me back to the original things that I was into, but which books I never had, which books I didn't have any longer. So what I did is I bought all of those. I repurchased all of those original, those original rules texts, like the Moldvay, basic expert sort of books. And I bought, I think reprints of the Player's Handbook and the DM's Guide. And when I read OSE, I thought, this is so great. This is just like, this is so clear. It's so clear, and there's just no ambiguity in these rules. It's so clear and so concise. It's such a fantastic re-articulation of, the rules that I really loved, when I was growing up, that I was just sold on it straight away, and I found it, in terms of writing, I found it just much easier to write for. I found it much easier to write for, because I'd read so many of the the old kind of D&D adventures, and I was so familiar with the stat blocks and all this kind of stuff, that I just found OSE just a much easier system to write for than DCC. And also too, that there was also a writing style of the adventures, which I think appears in Xanadu, and I think certainly appears in Dungeon, that there was a particular kind of way to describe areas, like in a dungeon, with the bullet points and the bold and all that kind of stuff. And that's not something that you see in DCC very much. I mean, DCC is very kind of, it's almost very purple prose laden kind of descriptions, whereas OSE descriptions are a bit more kind of clinical, if you like. And I just found that, because one of my strengths is, I mean, I'm not a great writer, so it just suited me to sort of think, oh well, I can write adventures now because I've got this kind of template, to kind of work with. Because I found writing in the DCC style, which is very, it's very rich and almost very Baroque kind of writing. I think, oh well, I just don't have the skills to do that, I admire it, but I don't have the skills myself to kind of like, to use tons and tons of adjectives and things like that. So I thought, yes, OSE is great, because it's like, here are these, single words or a couple of word descriptions, and it's elaborated on bullet points. So that's one of the reasons why I sort of, kind of moved over to OSE, because I just thought that it was just the adventures, the early adventures that Gavin wrote, like, showed me that I could, not be a great writer, but I can still write adventures, because here's like a template of how to do it with an economy of words.
And when did you connect with Gavin about Dolmenwood? And for those that don't know about Dolmenwood, that's Gavin's home world that he leaks out and shares via his Patreon. And I know that it's a highly anticipated release. And how did you get involved as far as doing the overall design and layout?
Yeah, so what happened is Gavin approached me after seeing Xanadu. He really enjoyed the layout on that, and he asked me to get involved with Dolmenwood in terms of the the visual design aspect. So what I did for that was essentially establish a lot of the typographical hierarchies in the book. So Gavin does the layout. I think he actually writes Dolmenwood within the layout itself, and he'd kind of he'd established a layout already. If you're a Patreon supporter of Dolmenwood, if you go back to the early Patreon releases, you can actually see what Dolmenwood looked like before I got involved. So what I did was, choose all, select all the typefaces, make sure that they work together, do all that kind of thing. So I'm not fully doing the layout, but I suppose it's the look of Dolmenwood, if you like, the look of it was something that I had a hand in. But what I do now for Gavin is I do art direction and layout work for I'm doing some art direction and layout work for some up and coming adventures, for about 8 of them.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah. So there are a couple of anthologies coming out,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm doing the actual layout and all the art direction for those, which is something that I actually really enjoy. I mean, to actually one thing I've realized that I really enjoy is to actually do the layout for RPG books that aren't mine. it's something that I actually really enjoy. It feels kind of refreshing, and it just feels like that, there's not, it just doesn't feel like there's so much pressure, because when you're doing your own layout and your own writing and everything, it's like it's quite intense. But to actually have a breather and to have someone else that's done the writing, and you actually just have to figure out how to kind of structure it in terms of how the information design is structured. That's something that I've actually really, really enjoyed, and something that I hope that I can get to do a bit more of as well.
Cool.
Of
And
other people's work.
and going back to like me, my background too, like information design, graphic design, and that kind of stuff. So I really, when I see it work, it feels so nice to see and read it in your book, and you just go, oh, I just love the way this is laid out. And I would say, if anything, OSE might be a little bit too sterile, and I really like kind of the balance with a lot of your products that kind of mix it a little bit more up with the DCC kind of vibe. So it's kind of like that nice balance, but not to say I don't like OSE. It's an amazing product, and I'm sure that Kickstarter is going to be massive, massive when it goes out. I predict.
I think it's going to be pretty big. Yeah. I think a lot of people are waiting for it. And I think just back to, I think, something that, I've learned about, one thing that I think about a lot is like, what's the best way to write, what's the best way to do adventure design? Like, what's the best way to describe, like, a room and its contents? And I think the answer that I've come to is that there's no best way. It's always, you'll always be questioning. You'll always be thinking like, is there a better way to actually do this? It's like, if I'm writing an adventure, should I use bolded words and bullet points, or shouldn't I? Should I have it in a more conversational style? Should I? And that's just, I don't think there's an answer to that.
Yeah, probably
I don't really think there is a best way to write an adventure.
Yeah, I was going to say probably the answer is it depends, right? Like
it depends.
It depends, right? And speaking of Kickstarters, you have one out right now. And how stressful is kickstarting for you? Because I mean, I've only done one for like a film that I did, and I found it super stressful. How do you approach it as far as?
I think, look, I mean, it's certainly quite a bit of work to get all the sort of copy ready to put up on the campaign page. Like, to actually write everything, really takes quite a while. Like, I mean, it took me a couple of months, of just kind of, doing bits here and there and sort of figuring it all out. Like, look, I mean, it is stressful. But look, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I found this Kickstarter stressful, because I mean, one of the things to not make it stressful is that the entirety of my current Kickstarter is entirely written. So it's entirely written. So the only things that I have to do is commission like a few more sort of pieces of art, and I've given myself a few months to do that. So I think to make it really stressful, and I do see some Kickstarters do this, is where they have 10% written, and they kind of say like.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Kickstarter, and we'll deliver in 18 months time, but nothing is written. I would not do that. I actually like to have everything actually written, and then to do the Kickstarter, which is what I did for Dungeon, which is a Kickstarter that I did last year in February as, part of Zine Month. And that actually, that, I mean, it took 6 months to get all the art, because I'd commissioned no art at all. But I think the answer is it could be more stressful if I hadn't sort of finished the writing.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, I mean, a lot of people have taken that approach. Kevin Crawford in particular, I've noted, like, his is already done, and similar to yours, it's like done. And it's just like you can get the PDF as soon as it's kind of done backing.
Oh, he's a machine.
He is a machine.
He's just a machine. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So
it's
yeah,
amazing.
As soon as you get over that 6-month period, I'm kind of like, well, why did you go to Kickstarter yet?
Yeah. And I think the other thing with Kickstarter too is, like, I mean, my very modest zine that's up there now, I mean, it's literally just a staple bound book. I mean, there's nothing, like, I'm not doing leather bound editions, I'm not doing dice, I'm not doing miniatures, it's kind of, so I think it would be more stressful if you had a lot more things that you wanted to do, so I can see how, some of these bigger Kickstarters, which have, really elaborate kind of stretch goals and things that they're really expanding things out with boxes. I can imagine how that would be stressful because as a creator, I mean, obviously you want to get funded. So I can see how a Kickstarter would be stressful, but I think the two that I've done so far have been very, very low stress, simply because they're essentially, I mean, I'm offering, modest periodicals. Like I haven't gone down that route yet where, to do like a hardcover or to do a slipcase or anything like that, which I'd like to do at some point, but not right now. Not yet, anyway.
The box set, right? Wait for the box set.
Wait for the box set. Yeah, yeah. Wait for the Aquilus box set with all with the dice.
Quick question for you: do you still use Mixam, or have you found like a local printer in New York?
No. I mean, I actually still use Mixam. I actually still use Mixam. I mean, I do have a project for for just back to a hardcover for something that for something that I'd like to do in, probably the next 24 months, which is a hardcover book of something. And I have researched printers I don't think Mixam are kind of capable of, or they probably are, but I haven't looked at them, but I've looked at some other printers that other publishers have used, but so far it's just been Mixam. I don't think there are any sort of local publishers, and if they were in the New York area, they'd be much more expensive than Mixam.
And I have to ask you a question. So I've got Nightland here, and in size comparison.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm trying to hold it up. How come Dungeon you went with a slightly smaller size?
Well, there's a reason for that. Because Dungeon is rissographically printed. That's printed using a rissographic printer, which is just a really stunning printing process. So what a risso machine is, a risso is a Japanese photocopier, and plates are made for each solid color. So it almost prints the color prints solidly, almost like a screen print.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because it's done essentially on a photocopier. The optimum size for printing, the optimum flat size is 16 by 10 inches. And so half of that folded is 8 by 5.
Okay.
And so I mean, that's the reason why. So the other size of the Mixam size is A5, which I think is 8.3 by 5.8 inches. And you cannot print, I don't believe you can print a rissographic book at that size.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the reason.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
That's the reason. Oh. Yeah. So I think if you ever see other rissographically printed zines out in the wild by other creators, like at zine fairs or book fairs or whatever, you'll find that the standard size that most people are printing at is the size that I printed at, which is 8 by 5. I actually really like it. I mean, I actually like the kind of artifact nature of it, because it's slightly slim.
Yeah.
And look, that was the constraint. And to be, I actually really enjoy working with constraints. I really liked it when the printer said, "This is the maximum size we can print at," and I said, "Great." And I said, that's basically going to have an impact on the design and the layout, which I would not have done otherwise without you giving me this limitation. And I really enjoy working with limitations. It's just something that, you probably know as a designer, that limitations are very important.
Yeah, for sure.
They actually spark off sometimes your best ideas, and they can make whatever you're doing go into a very unexpected but very rewarding direction.
Yeah, nothing is scarier than a blank canvas that you can do absolutely
than a blank
anything.
Canvas. No.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, love your work. It's great stuff. What is coming next?
I'm working on. I've got Dungeon issue 2 coming next. That's kind of, it's probably about 70% written. And I got a lot of feedback off Dungeon on Dungeon 1, and there are some great ideas, great sort of great comments people made, which I'll incorporate into the second issue, just in terms of, you know, some of the writing and some of the layout. So that's coming up, and I'm working on Aquilus issue 4, which is actually almost completed. And I think they're the two. And another thing that I've got coming up, which is a very quirky thing, which is pretty much the writing's completed, and I'm just waiting on one final piece of artwork. Is a supplement of using superhero abilities in fantasy role-playing games.
Oh, interesting.
And that was I was at a con, and I played a D&D game, a basic D&D game with, you know, his name slips my mind, but he's very famous. He drew the cover of Isle of Dread for TSR, and he also wrote the original Villains and Vigilantes. And his name just slips my mind, unfortunately, but hopefully the viewers can look him up. But he ran a fantastic basic D&D game at a con a few years ago, where he gave every character a minor superpower, you know, like they were a band of superheroes, but, you know, they were adventurers. And I thought, what a fantastic idea, you know, what a cool and quirky idea. So what I did is, over the last year, I've written kind of a supplement of how to give characters, you know, not game breaking, but how to give them minor sort of flavorful superpowers. So what I did is I went back through the entire history of comic books and researched kind of every kind of superpower that I could find. And I think I came up with about 300.
Wow.
And I've kind of incorporated them all into this supplement. So that's something that will I'm not sure what I'll do with that. I don't know if I'll Kickstart it. I might just release it into kind of the wild, because I'm really not sure what the audience will be like for something like that. But it has some fantastic art done by one artist called Ken Landgraf, who was a comic book artist who worked for Marvel Comics and also did his own superhero line. So that's just something that, you know, has been on the back burner, but it's something that's finished and due to be released at some point. So they're the three main things, and then I have some other things which I'm working on as well. But what I've tried to do over the last 6 months is just limit myself to not trying to do too many things at once, to just focus in on 2 things, because at one point I was working on like 5 or 6 things and they weren't going anywhere.
Are you, you know, not to pry too much, but are you able to do this as a full-time gig now, or do you still have your day job?
No. I still have my day job, but, you know, it's something that I spend, you know, I spend my nights kind of, you know, I spend a lot, you know, some of my nights kind of doing this. So, you know, I just, you know, turn up home, you know, draw the curtains, listen to music, and kind of and try and sort of, you know, try and do something almost every day, even if it's not writing, you know, even if it's like maintaining my website or doing, you know, researching layout, design and tricks, or, you know, looking at fonts. I'm always you know, trying to be productive and to do something, even if it's not necessarily like punching in words into a keyboard. So that's kind of yeah, I mean, that's what I do. I'm always trying to do something. So on a daily basis, whether it's, you know, 30 minutes or whether it's, you know, I'm lucky to be able to do like a few hours on it.
Would you ideally love to do this full time, or does it take away from the fun of it?
No, it doesn't take away from the fun of it. And I think I've actually thought about, you know, how I would do this full time, and I think the only kind of solution that I've sort of come up with to be able to do it full time would be to commission a lot of work by other writers, to actually commission, you know, to do it under my publishing imprint and put, you know, the Singing Flame imprimatur on it and presentation, and, you know, to put that kind of brand to it, if you like, but it would mean like actually like going to different writers and having a number of things on the go at once, and that's another kind of a project.
Yeah.
You know, that's when you become kind of a publisher, as opposed to kind of like an auteur, kind of one person kind of doing everything. And so that's probably I mean, I think some one person creators out there can do it full time. I probably don't think I can, but I think, you know, if I was to go into more of a publishing role, and you know, because that's what some of the bigger publishers seem to do. You know, like, you know, I mean, when you look at like back to DCC, I mean, Joseph Goodman's not writing and designing everything. You know, he's got like a whole band of writers. There's a tone, there's a sensibility to the entire thing, and you know, they're probably working on 6 or 8 things at one time, if not more. And I think that's the way to, you know, that's probably one way to do it. Would mean kind of scaling up, and that's not out of the question. But I think for me it would be, you know, just figuring out the exact tone of what it is that you want to put out there. You know, it's like, you know, if you sort of become a bigger publishing sort of become a bigger publisher, like what do? You know, do you make your own system up? Do you just do things for OSE, or do you start doing things for other popular systems like Mothership and Mork-Borg? And you know, there's just all of these sort of questions, you know, that you have to answer before doing that. So I'm, you know, again, it's not out of the question. It would be just finding that kind of niche where, you know, it would be just as interesting for me as it would for the audience and the people that you bring on board. So we'll see. I mean, publishing is great. I mean, it's you know, making books is that people enjoy is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I'm you're probably younger than me, but ultimately I loved old print magazines, and I used to go down and buy my Dragon magazine from the bookstore, and it was an experience, and flipping through it, and all the zines that have come from the OSR era. You know, it's a golden age, I think, of game design.
Yeah, I think it is now, you know, and I think, you know, a lot of the things that, you know, there's just so much innovation that there's so much innovation and creativity that I see. I think out of all of the, you know, I mean, I'm interested in, you know, popular, you know, all kinds of popular culture, but I see what's coming out of, you know, people in OSR book publishing. I mean, I just get really ignited by it. I think, God, you know, there's just so many great ideas, so many great books, you know, so many great artists. It really is. I mean, it's really great that people are. I just think it's fantastic that that it seems to be sort of growing. You know, the hobby seems to. It's not diminishing. There aren't less people playing games. There's just more people playing games, and there's more great stuff coming out, and that's kind of, you know, that's a real joy to see.
Well, your stuff has definitely added to the fabric of the community, and I think it's just been amazing that you've been able to produce what you've done in the last 2 years, and I look forward to seeing a lot more from you in the future.
Thank you.
So, Vasili, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank
very
you
much appreciate it.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.